Well, I'm so glad that you ended up with like the whole idea of internationalism and solidarity, because I think that is the tie that binds these two different May Day experiences. And I guess before I open it up to the floor, because I'm sure people have comments and questions, but I wanted to just give you all another opportunity to talk specifically about international solidarity, the example that Cuba sets in terms of like 6 decades worth of living it and showing it and responding to the world as far as sharing the resources the limited resources they have, but also where we're at in the United States in terms of kind of building that type of perspective, that internationalist perspective through our unions, in our communities. And I think part of it also includes the immigration and these immigrant workers that are coming in who are an impressive part of this new emerging leadership, young immigrant workers. So I just want to kind of give anybody a chance to speak to internationalism, if there's anything additional that you want to say.
I'll say one thing. The doctors who the Cuba has sent throughout the world have been an amazing demonstration of solidarity. Because we know the shortages that have gone on in Chicago, thinking of the hospitals that have closed like Weiss, West Suburban recently, and the impoverishment of care that's there. So I think that's one. But I want to go back in history too. Because Cuba did something I think very important in Africa when they sent soldiers to help support the Angolan government against the racist South African government. And I think that blunted that. And so I think that the solidarity today has been one that availed material support, and they're no longer engaged in anything like that. But I think that that's a sweep of what they've been able to do to be able to actually help people across the world.
Yeah. Something I learned from experience of seeing doctors in Mexico, in very poor communities, is the approach. They were teaching them how to take care of things, like how to take care of the water they were drinking. Even giving them advice on how, personal hygiene and that kind of thing. Usually, doctors in Mexico, they don't even talk about it. They will go into the routes of the problems. So that was very comforting for me to see that those doctors, they were from Cuba, and with not that many resources, they were really changing, educating our people in Mexico. And that's for the, Stacy, thank you for illustrating us about the challenge they are facing in Cuba. But the other thing here in the United States, now the role that immigrants are playing, we are suffering the consequences of having a president that doesn't recognize the contributions of immigrants. He really, don't see that. But at the same time, that policies that are always very punitive with immigrants, I think that this new generation of immigrants, the kids, the new Americans, are really challenging, and they are not afraid to go out and speak out and say, hey, we are human rights. We are human beings, and we are not criminals, and we are here to fight for our rights. And that's changing, and we are going to see big changes in the near future, and taking next elections, I hope, because they are really seeing that if they don't participate, civic participation, we are going to be having other politicians abusing the power, like it's happening today.
It's alarming to me how many Cuban doctors have had to go back to Cuba because of the pressure that the Trump administration has put on countries from, I think, Honduras and many others to not only not do trade with Cuba or send supplies to Cuba, but also accept some of the greatest contributions that Cubans have made historically and would still do. It really struck me during the COVID height, what I call height of the COVID pandemic, because pandemics and diseases are far from gone. But during the height, while this nation was having all kinds of, combat across state lines to get everybody vaccinated, Cuba had developed several vaccines, at least 3, I think, and had distributed them through their healthcare networks to everyone on the island. Now, how could they do that? They did that because they have a vision that plans that, and they also were open to collaboration, the door for which has pretty much been shut at the moment. I'm aware that there was some collaboration. I forgot if it was some upstate New York lab on one medication. I doubt that that's still going on. But one thing we did learn, despite the accurate description by Rob of the lack of certain supplies and ability to go to conferences and so on, somehow they've made some inroads in research that could treat Alzheimer's. I don't know the exact extent of it or the specifics. Rob likely knows more of the ins and outs of that, but they also talked about diabetes. There are things that the way they collaborate with one another and would collaborate with the rest of the world could advance for all of us. So it makes me think, and I'm thinking we're headed in another direction, I hope you both agree, but many of our unions here, when you bring things to the floor, this is my experience, I'm a few years retired now, about international stuff, you hear the argument, well, we got to worry about our immediate situation. And it was quite a step forward to not just worry about bread and butter issues, but worry about the whole well-being, like the schools that Chicago students deserve, which CTU was out in front on. And I think that when we think about solving the problems of the climate crisis and the migration from the global south to the north and the likelihood of more pandemics and disease, it's clear that we need global cooperation, and our unions should be in the forefront of demanding that kind of solidarity. So I'm hopeful we'll be able to take this information and build in that direction so that the force that has the power to put pressure on corporations and government hopefully will be able to do that better.
Yeah, just to continue on that vein, others have said, internationalism is certainly important, especially in this country, because nationalism in particular American jingoism, like America First type nonsense, is a poison that is deep, runs deep in this country. It was whipped up by Trump, and that's the reason he was able to win the last couple elections that he won, because he just kind of, he didn't really win the first one, I guess, but get the idea that America has to be first, it's about American jobs, making America strong, and like harkening back to the so-called good old days of the post-World War II era. And it speaks to people's real material conditions, being that their kids can't afford a college, they can't afford to buy a house, gas prices, it speaks to that, but it directs it the wrong way, saying the problem is immigrants, the problem is other countries, etc., rather than the problem being the billionaires that have been leeches in our society since its inception. And it is outrageous, you think about it, to have this kind of anti-immigrant sentiment put up by this government in a country that was founded on stolen land, in addition to stolen labor, like bringing Africans from the continent to work that stolen land, to have this idea that somehow someone could be illegal on this. And I think for more and more people, they've made that connection because they saw the implications of tear gases in the streets, of kidnapping people, which is still happening at a much lower level than before, but it's still continuing happening. And I think that people are now making the connection between what happens in this country, what's happening abroad, and the problem. So I think that's a positive thing. And it allowed organizations like the C2 to easily pass a resolution to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, to say that we're opposed to the U.S. intervention in Venezuela as well as Iran. Because I think that those are connections that are important to bring forward and to talk about the kind of internationals that we are going to need as workers all around the world who have the same interests. And the last thing I'll just say is I think obviously the midterm elections are going to be an important thing to understand and try to get our heads around. I think it's also important, in particular in the question of nationalism and immigration, it really is a bipartisan philosophy that immigrants should be kept out, that U.S. should be number one. This is something that both Democrats and Republicans share an agreement on. So I think that's something we need to consider as people who are fighting for an alternative. How do we achieve that if then we have these limited choices that are presented to us in our so-called democracy?
Okay, thank you. All right, so I am going to open the floor for discussion. And I'm going to start with Dr. Howard. Dr. Howard is with another Cuba coalition, or the Levante for Cuba, who's been active in doing some Cuba solidarity stuff. So Howard, I'm giving you like three or 4 minutes.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Howard Ehrman, and we are really excited to be at this event, and really want to thank Julie and everybody else who spoke. We're inviting everyone here in the next month to join us in front of the Jesse Brown Veterans Administration Hospital, and also in front of the new Fannis Clinic at Damon and Polk, in what is the only place in the United States that has 3 public hospitals in the same place. It's the only place that has one of the 3 largest VA hospitals, plus Cook County Hospital, plus the only place in the state of Illinois that's a public hospital for everyone. I worked there for decades. Dennis has worked there a little bit less. We were colleagues at Cook County. I think Dennis is still sometimes moonlighting there. So here's the deal. Everything that was said here is incredible, but if we don't go out to civil society and tell people what is happening with the 2-way blockade of stopping people from getting the medicines that were talked about, we're not going to be able to bring down the blockade. 5 weeks ago, we were one of the 2 organizations in Santiago de Cuba as part of the convoy. We spent the entire day with 4 patients and 25 doctors who only worked on diabetics and who showed us their feet. We'll be happy to share these pictures with you, who still had their feet and their toes because they had Ibuprofen B, which is the medicine Cuba invented 15 years ago that's been used in 39 countries, but is blocked from coming to the US. So we have to really develop a strategy around the 2-way blockade. This is not to take away from the genocide that's happening in Cuba, but there's a genocide here. Diabetes and amputations have nothing to do with race. It's all based on class and on racism. Black and Latino and Native American patients have 3 times the amputation rates as white patients. If you want to go here to Rush, try to find a white upper middle class patient who's had a diabetic amputation versus walking across the street to Cook County and U of I, and in particular Jesse Brown. So that's the first thing. The second thing has to do with the fact that in 5 weeks we'll be working together with the Chicago Cuba Coalition and everybody else here to welcome 2 members of the Cuban Embassy from Washington. One of these members worked on the family code, the only time in human history that a country has actually taken something and changed its constitution among the rights of women and the rights of all people who are non-binary. This is an incredible historic event that we all have an opportunity to do to expand our work. And the last thing is what Fernando Gonzalez, one of the Cuban 5, who was the leader of ECAP, said to people from the United States in Mexico City in October. We thank you for everything you do, but your aid has to help us become more self-sufficient. What does that mean? I'll just give you one example. We were in the villages in Santiago de Cuba. The most revolutionary place in Cuba is the municipality of Guaymas. That's exactly where the Comandancia was. We had people who were still alive, who watched Fidel and Che walk down the sendero, which is the path, and liberated their villages and divided the land immediately among the campesinos. This is a place where basically we would invite everybody else to go with us, but the idea of self-sufficiency has to start with food. Cuba has never grown more than 30 to 40% of their food from when Christopher Columbus put his sword in the ground in Baracoa. They didn't grow it under the US, the Spanish, they didn't grow it under the US, and they didn't grow it under the Soviet Union mono-agriculture with sugarcane, as we heard. Now they want to do it. So aid has got to include getting stuff directly to the campesinos. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank the panelists. That was a really great panel presentations. I'm just wondering if those of you that were in Cuba, could comment a little bit more about this international conference that you all went to, actually that slide right there, that, hundreds of people were at. Were there, what came out of that? Were there resolutions? Was there a plan of action? Like coming out of this meeting today, what can we do to deepen this? And did that conference, lay the groundwork for us to be able to move forward along those lines?
I think it's more important than ever for everyone who wants to support Cuba to try to work together, all groups and individuals, more so than we have in the past. Redouble our efforts. With sanctions that Trump announced last week, very draconian. It cuts down, it outlaws practically everything. And threats of intervention. I'm going to take over Cuba, do whatever I want with it. Well, it won't be as easy as he thinks to try that, but Cuba has no choice but to take those kind of threats seriously and try to prepare to defend the country as best they can, and they're doing that. Now, I had a specific question. About a month ago, a Russian oil tanker arrived in Matanzas, and it was said that there was a second Russian tanker that was going to be on the way. I was wondering if people heard anything about that.
He was canceled. Unfortunately.
Yeah, Dr. Howard says that Russian tank, the second tank was canceled. So, okay, so I'll just kind of like make some brief remarks about the international conference. It really was a good conference, and I think, I'm not sure if anybody said it, but there was over 800 international guests participating in May Day this year. And the guests actually were part of the march, rather than kind of spectators on the side. So at the conference, there was a number of different presentations that were given from activists from around the world, included a couple presentations from one of the co-chairs of the National Network, and then some leaders from the LA Hands Off Cuba Committee. And one of the things that really I took from this conference was the urgency in terms of organized protest and action. There has been a call to do a petition, international in scope, that kind of like basically is a version of what the petition that was initiated and signed by over 6 million Cubans, which in Cuba it's about commitment to defend and stand in defense of the homeland and national sovereignty. So it's a commitment, it's a physical kind of gesture of people's willingness to kind of stand in support and against what the U.S. government is doing. So similar, or like a U.S. or an international version is going to be made available and shared, and people are going to be able to share it with your neighbors, on the job, in the community, basically kind of giving us an opportunity to talk about what's going on and having people sign on to this petition, which will then be sent to, I believe, the United Nations. Or I think it's going to be, actually, we've been instructed that it should go to the embassy, the Cuban embassy, which then will forward to the United Nations. There are other things that are in the works and ways that you can participate, and there's some information of different things going on that table in the back. So one thing that I would encourage you all to do is to sign up on the Cuba Coalition mailing list. As Dr. Howard said, there is plans for a delegation from the Cuban embassy to visit Chicago around labor notes. So we're trying to set up some different meetings with different people. Hopefully we'll be able to get a reception at Labor Notes Conference, so there can be an exchange with labor rank and file, union officers with the Cuban delegation. But if you're interested in helping out, and all help is welcomed, and really it's needed now more than ever. So I would, again, just refer you to that table and sign up, because we need your help. And I think this is a part of that international solidarity effort that people have been talking about. So does anybody have anything else to say about the international conference?
I just wanted to share, it was my first time attending as part of the delegation and being at this conference. The president did address the conference and laid out like 3 primary goals going forward. And that one of them, one of them was a complete transformation of energy in Cuba, which is understandable since the petroleum blockade has been so devastating. Another was a goal towards agroecology and food sovereignty. And a third was continuing with, being resourceful and using mobilization as a way to kind of like make do until they could make these other transformations, increasing exports and production as part of that. Some other interesting things as presentations, there were many organizations that presented, and they would discuss important topics such as like, is Cuba experiencing an embargo or a blockade, making the distinction between that. Is Cuba a failed state, making distinguishing between why it is not, and other important topics like how the blockade is presenting itself internationally as, trying to present itself internationally as something other than a cruel and illegal act. Like the pretty face of the blockade, that was another conversation. So just to give an idea of some of the discussions that were happening or presentations that were delivered at the conference.
Just a brief comment. The conference is a conference. You don't talk to each other very much, but afterwards, there was a wonderful reception at the Friendship House where we got to go around, and I sat down with a bunch of people from Brazil, spoke to some of them in halting Spanish on both sides, and another person in English. And frankly, that was just a very good chance to be able to find people of like minds and so on, and I thought that was a wonderful experience. And thank you, Howard, for bringing up the food thing, because I think that's important.
Yeah.
Hey, Naomi Graham with the Socialist Workers Party. I very much appreciate, comments made about the need for everybody who wants to defend Cuba to act together today. I mean, this is an assault like we haven't seen since the very early years of the Cuban Revolution in terms of, how serious it is. I think the need for public protests and for, extending the education about the Cuban Revolution. I want to what Stacy referred to about the literacy campaign. I mean, I think that really captured what the Cuban Revolution is, which is not a thing. It's not it's not just a set of structures. It really has been marked for decades by the participation and mobilization and involvement of literally millions of people in changing their own society. And the additional side of it is the revolutionary leadership in Cuba from the very beginning inculcated, advanced the notion of international solidarity and explained, no one will be free if you can't fight for the freedom of others. So the participation, both the medical collaboration and the, support for liberation struggles. I mean, Angola is one of the best known, but, everything from Algeria to Guinea-Bissau to struggles in the Americas. I mean, it's been a tremendous record. And that is why Washington is why it's totally bipartisan. It's not just the Trump administration. I mean, they're ratcheting up maximum pressure and feel blood in their mouth because of what they were able to accomplish in Venezuela. But this has been completely bipartisan policy for over 65 years to try and strangle the Cuban Revolution. So, I think the more we can educate about that, understand it's not an insane policy on the part of U.S. imperialism, but it's one that absolutely every working person in this country should oppose, and we need to educate people about it. And I believe public protest actions, even if they're small, are an important part of doing that kind of education and speaking out.
John Pottinger from Social Section. A suggestion for maybe it would be a good idea to print up a leaflet that had a QR code that led to a link for a webinar, sort of Cuba 101, at the next No Kings or next large anything, which there's a lot of people who are just coming into politics, who are demonstrating for the first or second time, a lot of new people. And if we could get, a couple hundred to go for a webinar, we'd be reaching a larger audience than usual, and a different audience than the usual suspects that might be here. Just an idea.
Yeah, I just want to actually expand the discussion from Cuba to a broader picture of the shooting war which we're involved in, which is Iran. As I see it, if you look at post-war world, there are three major defeats for US imperialism. China was a massive, incredibly important revolution, but it was not a defeat for the US. I mean, if anything, China had much to do with Europeans, Britain, something else.
It was in Korea.
The three major defeats for US imperialism post-war, that's in Vietnam, Cuba, and Iran. Vietnam has pretty much been ground down through neoliberalism. We get some of our shoes and shirts from Vietnam now. And the two remaining are Iran and Cuba. So I think that's what we're dealing with in terms of the wars and the pressures and what the US is doing today in terms of the blockade and also the shooting war that's happening. And very frankly, I thought that what they were going to do with my country, with Iran, was that they were going to bomb the hell out of it for a few weeks and then blockade it just like Cuba to let it rot. And that was actually part of the plan of some of the people who were not as hubris, if you look at it. Some of the Democrats were thinking that would be the best way to go forward. So do the Cuba model on Iran. And that's what they're trying to do with the blockade. And that actually is kind of hard to pull off with Persian Gulf, but it is a lot easier to do with Cuba, which is sitting here. So that's kind of what I want to raise, is that we need to kind of see it in terms of the big context of what's going on in the world and how these things are connected and how we need to resist. The second thing I want to say is that there is actually a lot of discussion because of the nature of the Iranian regime, and I want to just kind of put that in a different place, because I think the discussion of the nature of the Iranian regime is a ruse. It's an irrelevance to what we do here. Okay? If you want to focus on the Iranian regime and make it the best thing in the world, wrong discussion. If you want to talk about it and make it the worst thing in the world, wrong discussion, wrong meeting, wrong demo if you're protesting against the US imperialism. We need to focus on the nature of American regime. That's the focus. Okay? And I will tell you one thing. Everybody was for the life, women, and freedom demonstrations. And we all were. But at the same time, it's important to know the concretes. That was not the same as what happened in January. That was the high point of our movements. What happened in January was the low point of it. It was infiltrated, it was messed with, and that's why the high number of casualties and people who got slaughtered. Okay. I will say one thing about if you care about women, life, and freedom, and especially women in Iran. Facts matter. 70% of people who are in graduate school in STEM in Iran are women. If you look it up in Google, it has the highest rate of women participation in universities and graduate, postdoc, doc, graduate school in the world. Okay. If you end up bombing Sharif University, which is where, look at the one person in history of the world who has won the Fields Medal for mathematics, who is a woman, ever.
Can I ask you to wrap things up?
Sure.
We're
I will do that.
gonna give these,
Yeah.
the panelists final
Yeah.
words and then.
Yeah. It's a woman from Iran. Sharif University is where she went to school. If you're bombing the universities, if you're bombing the schools, you're actually destroying a civil society and destroying the possibility for life and freedom for women in Iran. What is going on is actually that disentangling, the destruction of the civil societies that kills generations forward in terms of their freedom, whether it's in Cuba or Iran.
Do you wanna say something?
There's a continual opportunity to go, for people in this area to go to Cuba. We still have that opportunity. How long it will last, we don't know. But there are a steady stream of people leaving from the Chicagoland area to Cuba. And it would be great if each one of those people takes a suitcase of medical supplies that are sorely needed in Cuba. So we have some medical supplies here locally. We can use more, and we can use some large suitcases. If you can donate any of those things, please let me know or let the people know at the table at the back. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Neil. Neil, do you wanna share how to contact you?
If you need it, Neal, Neil Betty at AOL.com, NealBetty@AOL.com.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, I came here a little bit late, so I'm hoping I'm not like repeating something that's already been said, but a couple things which I think, or one thing that I think is really important right now, especially, is like for any groups that are trying to kind of do anything to work against the system that we're seeing right now, to make sure not to forget about the other ones that are in the area as well. There are a couple groups that I know of that I'm kind of trying to. There's one really good one that I think would be really eager to work with you guys, especially with these things. It's called Behind Enemy Lines. You might have heard of them already, but they have a, I don't actually know exactly what their structure is, but I know they at least have a chapter in Chicago, and their whole focus is to do things against U.S. imperialism, pretty much. And there are, I think in general right now, there are just so many opportunities for these different activist-related groups to kind of get together and like coordinate with each other. And so that's another thing I just kind of want to like give you guys the idea of. Like, there are a lot of groups in Chicago that are doing things that are pretty much all on the same page. Pretty much all would like to see the system change or like get replaced. So yeah, I guess I can like try and talk to you guys afterwards or something and connect you with some people that I do know already. And I guess like I encourage everybody to try and go to multiple groups and get them to know each other a little bit better, and just make sure that we're not in our own bubbles, but working with each other as smartly as we can.
What's your name?
My name is Simon. I'll be around afterwards.
All right, we're kind of wrapping up. I want to give our panelists a chance to say final words.
I just have one anecdote I want to relate. At a restaurant one night, we were talking with a waiter who knew we were from the U.S., and we wanted to hear things that he had to say. He was very critical, really critical. And I remember at one point I said, well, what about the education system? They said, it's shit. And it went on like that. Anyway, so finally, one of the people I was with said to him, the revolution is a promise. And that stopped him for a second, at which point he then said, you know, my grandfather told me that when Fidel came to power and the revolution happened, that the revolution would take 100 years for it to be able to accomplish its goals. And I think that that was an interesting comment, because life is hard and people, you know, there's not an easy solution. But then when you begin to go back and reflect, I thought that was an interesting experience.
I also want to share an anecdote from Cubans, because they are very open and were very easy to speak with. on 2 different occasions, I had a chance to talk with the person who was driving our bus. We had 2 different drivers. And the first, he had shared how his family had moved to Brazil, his mother, his brother, his father. They were in Curitiba to earn more money. And when I asked, why didn't you leave? And he said, well, one, I think it might be very terrible to become an immigrant somewhere else. And having had immigrant parents, I agree with him. And then he also said, well, you know, sometimes there's no work here in Cuba, but also that could happen to me in Brazil. There might be times when there's not much work, except if I were there, I might be worried that someone would throw me out of my house. But I never worry about that in Cuba. And he said, and I just don't think that that's a worthwhile exchange.
Yep.
And I think he had a very wise perspective. The other driver was also making light of how challenging, because many of in the tourism sector, they went on months without work. And he had said, you know, in Cuba, he said, the hard times eventually will pass, even though we're always asking, how much longer until it passes? And he started laughing. So I just wanted to share that, because I think there's quite a wide variety of perspectives of Cuban people. And I was very inspired by how innovative and I think so many examples how innovative and just persistent they are to continue forward with their society. And I think you all should know that.
So I'm gonna make a plug for 2 books on the table that I really encourage people to buy and read. One is by the leader of the Cuban Federation of Trade Unionists, Pedro Ross, who basically writes about the workers' parliaments that took place in '94, I believe, where I think it was like 6 million workers organized tens of thousands of meetings to talk about post-Soviet collapse that impacted Cuba's national economy, how they could work through the areas of production to basically resolve the crisis that posed to Cuba in terms of just products and providing social or answering social needs. So that's one book. The other book that I think is really good is a book on People's Democracy by Charles McKelvey. And that book basically kind of like just provides a lot of good information, some data and stuff as far as the participatory democracy. And it kind of looks at the 2019 constitutional amendment and referendum. So those are the 2 books I think are really, really exceptional in terms of understanding more about Cuba's revolutionary process.
I have a couple of anecdotes too. And first I want to point out that, you know, democracy and what it is could be days, months-long debate. But they have rights to debate and discuss that are difficult for some of us in this country to imagine. Many times an argument is used that we have the 2-party system, and I think several people have pointed to the incredible lack of democracy we have with that 2-party system, no matter who you vote for, unless we have institutions of our own to make decisions. Well, in a way, in an important way, they have that. They are able to have discussions on many different levels about many different issues in communities, in workplaces, in their unions, and it may not be perfect, and people admitted there are mistakes, but there are ways to deal with grievances in a workplace and even policies of the government that are discussed. And I think that's something that a lot of people in this country have not really had experience with and don't really know the distinction between the 2 and how significant it might be. That being said, the discussion with the dancers, there were four of us having one-on-one with some of the dancers in this, you know, mixed ballet, modern dance. My t-shirt is from that company. And they were very young, and they weren't students, they were workers, and they did have other jobs, as I think Rob or Stacy, someone said. And when asked what they would like to do in a couple of years, one hoped to be dancing in Spain, Another hoped to have a family and a career, but also very much wanted to travel. And the other two were in a similar vein. Now, they're grappling with what their lives will be in circumstances that are really difficult. They would still defend their country against attack from the United States or anyone else. I think the very fact of that conversation is important and significant to note. And I think the fact that their connection to each other and to us was very loving, very comradely, and very open. So I don't think the answer exists yet on what will happen in the future, and we can hopefully be part of determining that outcome. I do think that we can't ignore the fact of what they're grappling with and the impact it's had on young people especially. It's a generational thing. They have family that lived through the time of the revolution, but they themselves didn't. And 1 million people leaving is not, it's significant and it's important. And that's of course over several years, but it's still a product of the conditions that I lay at the doorstep of our government. And another thing about the international conferences, many times it was stated that solidarity and mutual aid and any form of it, they're not charity. They are a form of fighting back as part of an international community of working people and oppressed. And that's the way that we should see it when we figure out what to do next. So last thing is, I want to encourage anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to go to Cuba to stay in touch with not only the Chicago Cuba Coalition, but there are other ways that many of us can talk about coming up throughout the year, not just on May Day. It may be hard for a teacher to go on May Day, but there are other times of the year, and they're all important and they're all enriching. And I encourage people. There were 7 of us from Chicago who were on the delegation of approximately 17 to 18, depending on which day you're talking about. And 3 others are here today. You don't have to identify yourself, but be available or talk with people afterwards, or any of us, because I think there are more things that we'd like to share and hear your thoughts on. And that's about it, other than I think there's a way forward, and I still have hope for the future, even with all that we're grappling with, that La Patria se defiende is a real thing, and we can help them do it.
Thank you, Linda. I think all of us here, we got the responsibility to change the narrative about Cuba. Because if we don't change the narrative, it's going to be very hard to change politics. And I think, well, from what I hear, they are having a very hard time. So we gotta continue being very creative. How are we gonna change that narrative about Cuba, and how can we change policy, right? So there is hope, yeah. And again, there is new generations, and we need to approach them. I know you are a teacher, so many of you are teachers, but you have the key to really educate our new generations about what really is going on in Cuba, and we got a responsibility. International solidarity has to be something like Linda said, I put it here, is global cooperation. How can we work in that concept? How can we, in our own environment, and with our friends, work in global cooperation? How are we gonna be aware of what's going on in Cuba, what's going on in Venezuela, now in Mexico, so we can have a very responsible global cooperation. And I just want to say thank you, Julie, for inviting me. Thank you.
I also want to thank the Cuba Coalition for hosting this important conversation about how do we put forward an international solidaristic organizing space. I think that the one thing that anyone who's organized in a workplace, I'm sure, knows is that sometimes the boss can be the best organizer. When they start messing with people at work, it allows you to have conversations that you maybe wouldn't be having otherwise, and it's an organizing opportunity. And what the Trump administration is doing with its embargo attacks on Cuba, with the war in Iran, with the genocide in Palestine, it is an opportunity to make connections that a lot of people are making to a system that is in one come from one country oppressing all of them. I think making those connections to people in this country about how do we fight back against that is something that we need to take up. The challenges I think that we had in Chicago in terms of organizing around May Day is that we didn't have like a boot at our neck. There wasn't tear gas in the streets in the same way that Minneapolis had on January 23rd, coming off the murder of Renee Good, to get people off the streets. But on the other hand, it was also an opportunity to have deeper conversation with people about what is May Day, what is our power as workers, how do we make the connection between the tiny group of billionaires who are destroying our society, who are oppressing people here at home and abroad, and how do we have the power as workers to change that? That narrative was definitely taken up by a group of healthcare workers who joined the May Day protest down in the medical district. We brought together unions from different nurses unions and doctors unions to come together in march against the awful the state of healthcare in this country. And so I think that just underlies, I think, a point that many people have made, is that history to change has to come from the bottom up. People, I'm sure, are familiar with the famous socialist Eugene Debs. He once wrote, maybe probably said it, I'm not here to be a Moses to bring you to the promised land. You have to do that yourself with your hearts and your hands. Because someone can easily lead you in, someone else can easily lead you out. And that's what we have to be, I think, for a people's movement, a bottom-up mass struggle to change society and bring about change. I've never been to Cuba, but I've been to China a few times. I can definitely say there's a lot of differences between China and Cuba in terms of what people think about society and how it's moving forward. My Chinese is not the best, but it definitely is not as free in terms of like freedom to speak about things as what it seems like is in Cuba, which I think is an important difference. One thing I will say is that was very familiar when I went to this last summer, was how international capitalism is making its print felt around the world. Regardless of how a country identifies itself or calls itself, the powers of international capitalism is having an effect on those countries, whether they like it or not, because that is how business takes place. And so I think our task as people in the belly of the beast, in this country that is exporting these awful neoliberal ideas, exporting murder, bombs, etc., is to how do we build connection with workers around the world and say we are there in solidarity with you. We will fight alongside you against a world dominated by billionaires, against a world dominated by a tiny number of people who are trying to oppress and destroy ourselves and our planet. And I think that's where we can see a hope for a future. For a real democracy where workers are running the world, we have nothing to lose but our change, as someone once said. Thank you so much.
First of all, that was a great summary and I mean, calling us all to task in terms of where we go from here, the need to build that solidarity, whatever that looks like, however that happens. I mean, the big goal was kind of like reaching, uniting, and building that solidarity. So again, thanking all the panelists for joining this discussion and leading, sharing your experiences at May Day. And all you for coming, and again, stay in touch. There's things we have to do, and it's going to require a lot of support and organization, and there's areas that you can all plug into. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.